If your daughter can translate this, I'll double your salary. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. Grace looked up, startled. Maya straightened, a dish still in her hand. "Excuse me?" Grace asked, approaching slowly, her hands still gloved in thin latex. "I said," Moreau repeated, louder. "If your daughter can translate this paragraph from French, I'll double your salary. Right here, right now." Grace looked around. Every eye in the room was on them. Teachers, parents, board members, a few smirked. Most just waited, curious, entertained. "That's not appropriate, sir," Grace said calmly. "She's just a child. We're working." "You're working," he sneered. "She's just hovering, and if she's as bright as I've heard." "She's helping me," Grace interrupted, her voice firmer now. Moreau's face tightened. "Do you understand what an opportunity is, Miss Jackson?" he asked, stepping closer. "Or have you been so stuck mopping floors you think pride pays the bills?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "She doesn't need to perform for you," Grace said through clenched teeth. "Then maybe she's not as smart as you think," he snapped. "Maybe you both belong exactly where you are." Maya stepped between them. "If you felt connected to the character in this story, give this video a like and comment. Where you're watching from, you never know. Someone near you might be watching too. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories." Her heart pounded, but her eyes didn't blink. "Don't talk to my mother like that," she said, her voice clear and sharp. There was a pause, a short one, then the cigar tray in Moreau's hand flew. It struck Maya just above her left eyebrow with a sickening crack. She staggered back, one hand flying to her face. Blood started to drip between her fingers. "Maya!" Grace screamed, rushing forward. She dropped to her knees, clutching her daughter. "Oh my God, baby. Are you okay?" Maya's face twisted, but not in pain. In fury, she pulled her mother's hand down gently, stood up straight, and looked directly at Laurent Moreau. "If I translate your paper," Maya said, her voice shaking but steady, "you're going to tell me exactly how much more you'll pay her, not just double. I want a number." Moreau looked stunned. "And you'll apologize," Maya continued. "To my mother, in front of everyone." The room held its breath. "She deserves respect, even if you can't spell it." A few gasps echoed across the room. One teacher actually stepped back. Someone else whispered, "My God." Then came the murmurs, quiet at first, then clearer. Some parents shook their heads. One woman muttered, "This is absurd." Another scoffed, "This girl? No way." Several people laughed under their breath, thinking it was a show, something to fill the space between the speeches and the dessert. "She won't be able to read a thing," someone said. "She probably memorized one phrase and now she thinks she's fluent. I doubt she even knows what French is," another added. Moreau's jaw twitched. He glanced around, realized eyes were on him now for the wrong reason. He chuckled, trying to reclaim control. "All right then," he said, pulling out a folded paper from his coat. "You want numbers? If you get this right, she makes $62,000 a year. Full benefits. I'll even throw in dental." Maya wiped her brow, smearing a thin trail of blood along her temple. She took the page with her clean hand. The paper trembled slightly. She read. Behind her, Grace stood frozen, torn between pride and fear. Maya's lips moved silently at first. Then she spoke. "It's a funding proposal," she said, addressed to the Conseil départemental in Paris. "You're requesting partial subsidies under Article 233 of the European Education Act." Moreau blinked. "You're emphasizing cross-cultural programming, but only to satisfy the diversity clause. The real goal is tax exemption disguised as humanitarian outreach." The room fell into a silence, so heavy it felt like the chandeliers had stopped swinging. "She's right," said a voice from the back. It was the school's language arts chair. Mr. Delaney, stepping forward. "That's exactly what it says." There was a beat, then a collective shift. People blinked. A low gasp rolled across the room like a wave. One parent whispered, "That little girl just shut him down." Another murmured, "That was flawless. Where did she learn that?" Someone clapped soft, awkward, but real. And Moreau? He stood like a statue, frozen, humiliated, lips parted but voiceless. For the first time that night, the room wasn't listening to him. They were looking at Maya, listening to her. Grace touched Maya's shoulder, trembling. Moreau finally moved. He cleared his throat, eyes lowered slightly. "Miss Jackson," he said, voice hoarse, "I apologize for my behavior. It was clumsy, uncomfortable. The words caught in his throat like thorns, but he said them. I'll process the salary change immediately." No one applauded, no one dared speak. But in the silence, the tide had turned. Grace put her arm around Maya and led her away from the table, a smear of red still glinting on her daughter's forehead. Halfway down the hall, Maya whispered, "Sorry I got hurt." Grace stopped, knelt down, and cupped her daughter's cheeks. "You didn't get hurt," she said. "You made them see." And deep inside the marble walls of Brookstone Academy, something invisible shifted. A crack. Small at first, but growing. The nurse dabbed gently at Maya's temple with a cotton pad soaked in antiseptic. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the gash still looked angry. A red crescent above her left eye. Grace sat beside her on the vinyl-covered cot in the small infirmary. Her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was dense, like the air before a thunderstorm. She hadn't spoken since the moment they left the dining hall. The door creaked open. Mrs. Hill, the assistant principal, poked her head in with a stiffness that didn't match her usual performative warmth. "Is she all right?" she asked, barely meeting Grace's eyes. "She's fine," Grace said shortly. Maya nodded. "It was just a tray." Mrs. Hill hesitated. "Mr. Moreau has left. He's very sorry about what happened." Grace didn't respond. She stared straight ahead. "He's also submitted the paperwork to HR," Hill continued. "Your salary's been adjusted, effective immediately." Still silence. "I hope we can all move forward," Hill added, voice trailing as she slipped back out. Maya swung her legs slowly, feet hovering above the linoleum floor. "They're scared of us now," she said quietly. Grace turned to her. "They're not scared. They're embarrassed. That's different." Maya shrugged, eyes distant. "Still feels powerful." Grace's heart twisted. There was pride there, yes, but also fear. A girl her age shouldn't have to learn how to protect her mother, shouldn't have to shed blood to make the world listen. "You shouldn't have stepped in like that," Grace said. "Not because I'm not proud. I am. But baby, that man, he's dangerous in a quiet way. The kind that smiles while he crushes you." Maya looked down at her lap. "But you were shaking." "I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid for you." Their eyes met. A silent truce. Then Maya's stomach growled. Grace laughed softly, the sound brittle. "Let's get you home. We've got leftover meatloaf." Later that night, as the city pulsed in amber streetlight and the roar of late-night buses, Maya sat cross-legged on the couch with a bandage over her eyebrow and a warm plate in her lap. Grace stood by the window, watching the flicker of a street lamp that always shorted out when it rained. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Jackson?" The voice was deep, polished, but unfamiliar. "This is Daniel Porter. I'm Laurent Moreau's attorney." Grace bristled. "I want to assure you Mr. Moreau deeply regrets the incident today. He's aware that public perception may—" "This isn't about perception," Grace interrupted, her voice low but dangerous. "This is about a grown man throwing a metal object at a child." "I understand," the voice replied. "That's why Mr. Moreau would like to offer a settlement. For medical costs, pain and suffering. And she doesn't want his money. But she wants his respect." The line went quiet, then, "Understood. Have a good night, Miss Jackson." She hung up, chest heaving slightly. Maya was watching her. Was that him? His lawyer. What did he say? Nothing worth remembering. Maya smiled faintly and returned to her meatloaf. The next morning at Brookstone Academy felt different. Grace walked through the halls with a strange silence following her, not the silence of being ignored, but the hush that comes before people decide what to think. Some averted their eyes, some nodded awkwardly, others, mostly staff, smiled in quiet solidarity. When she entered the supply closet to grab her mop, Sheila, one of the cafeteria cooks, was already there, unpacking boxes. "You all right?" Sheila asked. "I'm fine." Sheila looked over her shoulder. "Girl, you know that wasn't just about the French." Grace sighed. "It's been coming a long time," Sheila said. "Someone needed to crack that marble. I just didn't expect it to be your baby. She's 12. She's brilliant. She's marked now." Maybe," Sheila said. "But now they've seen her. And once folks see what they tried to ignore, they can't unsee it." Grace closed her eyes for a beat. "I just want her safe. She's safer now than she's ever been," Sheila said gently. Power changes hands in strange ways. Maya's return to school wasn't met with applause or banners. It was quieter than that and more profound. Some kids avoided her altogether. Others looked at her with something between awe and caution. She wasn't popular before. Now, she wasn't invisible either. During English class, as Mrs. Carter handed back essays, a note fluttered from one of Maya's books. It was folded carefully, with neat, cursive handwriting. "What you did was brave. I hope you're okay. I never knew you spoke French. That was amazing, Ava." Maya stared at the note for a long time, then tucked it in her notebook, somewhere between vocabulary terms and a printed poem by Langston Hughes. At lunch, no one sat with her, but no one whispered anymore either. She ate in peace. That evening, back home, Grace found Maya at the table with the same French paper from Moreau. "Reading it again?" Grace asked. "I wanted to see if I missed anything." "You didn't." Maya looked up. "Why did he assume I couldn't read it?" Grace sat beside her. "Because he's used to judging people by their shoes, not their steps." Maya smiled. "Then maybe he should look down more often." Grace reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're going to change things," she said. Maya's eyes sparkled. "I already did." And outside, the broken streetlight blinked once, then held steady just for a while. The morning sun filtered through the cracked blinds of the Jackson apartment, casting thin golden lines across Maya's open notebooks. Her handwriting, neat, deliberate, covered every line of the page. French phrases, vocabulary lists, quotes from articles she'd printed at the library. Even her own translated notes filled the table like evidence in a trial only she knew she was preparing for. Grace stirred oatmeal on the stove. The old fan above the stove buzzed with a soft mechanical fatigue, matching the throb still lingering in her chest. She kept replaying that moment, Moreau's tray flying through the air, the blood on Maya's forehead, and then, the room watching her little girl dismantle a man with power using only her words. "Baby," she said gently, "you don't have to keep going over that paper." "I know," Maya replied. "But it's not about that one anymore." Grace turned down the burner. "What is it about then?" "He was lying in that document. The program doesn't help kids like me. It's a front. I want to know how many more like it he sent." Grace blinked. "Maya, you're 12. 12-year-olds can read contracts. You want to fight a billionaire? I want to understand him. That's how you fight." Grace sat down slowly, bowl in hand. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "If I tell you where he sends his mail from, will that help?" Maya looked up, eyes wide. "You know, maintenance has to sign for courier deliveries. I've seen the name on the package labels. I know which office handles his legal work." Maya smiled like someone opening a hidden door. At Brookstone Academy, word of the confrontation hadn't disappeared, it had simply gone underground. In the teacher's lounge, conversations paused when Grace entered. In classrooms, Maya felt eyes trailing her movements. There were no more jokes at her expense, no whispers of charity case. But what replaced it was more unsettling: silence, speculation, and distance. "Mrs. Carter called her up after class. I wanted to say," she began carefully, "what you did took courage." Maya tilted her head. "Are you going to mark me down for it?" Mrs. Carter blinked. "No, of course not. Because it feels like everything's changed, but not in a way that helps me." Mrs. Carter sat back. "Sometimes change is slow, Maya. But that doesn't mean it didn't start. and sometimes people need time to understand what they saw. I don't need them to understand, Maya said. I need them to stop pretending I wasn't right. That night, Maya stayed up late, combing through public databases online. She'd learned from the school's librarian how to use government records, nonprofit filings, grant distributions, even board member disclosures. She typed in L. Moreau Philanthropic Trust and narrowed her search. Grace came by her room with a glass of warm milk. "You're burning out that keyboard," she said with a soft smile. "I found something," Maya said. 2 grants approved under his foundation. Both went to schools in wealthier districts. The reports claimed diversity outreach, but enrollment barely changed. No new language programs. No free meals added. Just some murals painted in the hallways. Grace frowned. "You think he's cooking the books?" "I think he's hiding behind words that sound good to people who never check." Grace leaned on the doorframe. "And what will you do with what you find?" Maya shrugged. "Show someone who will listen." Grace hesitated. Then she walked over and placed a small envelope on the desk. "This came for you," she said. "From the school." Maya opened it. Inside was a single folded note on Brookstone Academy letterhead. "You've been invited to speak at the Student Ethics Forum next Friday. Topic: Voice, Justice, and Responsibility." Grace raised her eyebrows. "You're not even in 8th grade," she said. Maya stared at the letter. "They want me to talk about responsibility?" Grace's voice dropped. "Are you going to do it?" Maya nodded slowly. "I think I have to." On Friday, the forum was held in the school's small auditorium. Rows of folding chairs filled with students, faculty, and a few curious parents. A modest banner stretched across the stage, hand-painted, "Voices that Matter." Maya stood behind the podium, bandage now gone but the faint scar still visible. She wore her one nice shirt and the blazer Grace had borrowed from Sheila's niece. She looked out at the crowd, took a breath, and spoke. "I'm 12 years old," she began. "But I've already seen people dismiss me, not because I'm wrong, but because I make them uncomfortable." Silence. I didn't ask to become a story. But when a man in power threw something at me because I challenged him, I realized something. Words matter more when people expect you not to have them. She scanned the crowd. Some teachers stared at their shoes. Others leaned in. And when someone pretends to help people like me, but only if we stay silent and grateful, then what they offer isn't help. It's control. Wrapped in a ribbon of charity. Gasps. Whispers. A ripple moved through the room. Grace sat in the back row, hands clenched in her lap, eyes glistening. "I believe in justice," Maya continued. "But not the kind you wait for, the kind you make, with truth, with questions, and with courage even if you have to bleed for it." A pause, then applause. Not polite, not forced. Real, long, loud. Maya stepped down from the podium, and for the first time, she didn't feel like the girl with the mop or the girl who translated French. She felt like the girl who cracked something open and dared to keep going. And somewhere, far from the school auditorium, Laurent Moreau read a transcript of her speech forwarded to him by his assistant. He didn't say a word, but for a moment, his hand trembled. Just slightly. Laurent Moreau stood alone in the mirrored elevator of his Manhattan office tower, his reflection multiplied in cold steel and glass. The transcript of Maya Williams' speech sat folded in the inside pocket of his tailored blazer, but the words replayed in his mind as vividly as if they were being broadcast over the elevator speakers. He had underestimated her. No, he had dismissed her. And now, a 12-year-old girl had carved a crack into his perfectly polished image. He clenched his jaw as the elevator doors opened onto the 34th floor, revealing the sterile opulence of Moreau Global Holdings. "Morning, Mr. Moreau," his assistant called softly as he passed. He didn't respond. In his office, he tossed the transcript onto the desk and stared out at the skyline. New York had always been a city that respected one thing: power. And he had played that game well for decades. But now, one small voice had broken through. And the world was watching. Not in rage, not yet, but in doubt. And doubt, in his world, was poison. At Brookstone Academy, the buzz from the ethics forum hadn't died down. Maya walked through the halls like a ghost among the living whispers trailing her, eyes following her, some in admiration, others in silent envy or fear. In the lunchroom, a few students approached her table with cautious reverence. "Was that all memorized?" asked Ava, the girl who had once passed her a note in English class. "No," Maya said simply. "You made Mr. Delaney tear up," another added. "He never cries." Maya didn't smile, but she gave a soft shrug. "I just said what I needed to say." Later that afternoon, in the school library, she was pulling reference books from the legal section when someone cleared their throat behind her. It was Mr. Price, the social studies teacher who had been silent through most of the Moreau incident. "I wanted to give you something," he said. He held out a worn paperback, The Souls of Black Folk by Webb Dubois. Maya accepted it carefully. "I've read parts of it. Read the rest," he said. "You're writing a chapter of your own now." Meh. That evening, as Maya spread out her findings on the dining table, receipts, documents, screenshots of public funding records, Grace watched her in awe and slight concern. "You're building a case," Grace said. "I'm building a timeline," Maya corrected. "The money Moreau claimed went to underprivileged schools? Some of it never arrived. Some went to consultants he owns." Grace sat across from her, rubbing her temples. "And you're going to do what? March it to the New York Times?" Maya didn't flinch. "I was thinking smaller. Local news first. The ones that cover school board meetings. They listen when the story affects their zip code." Grace looked at her daughter. 12 years old. But there was a gravity to her that scared her and inspired her at the same time. "Then you'll need help," she said. "Someone who knows how to speak their language." "I was hoping you'd say that." 2 days later, in a dim corner of Café Rustique, Grace and Maya sat across from Daniel Kim, a local education reporter for the East Village Ledger. He was young, sharply dressed, and slightly bewildered by the weight of the folder Maya had just handed him. "This is substantial," he murmured as he flipped through. "I triple-checked every number," Maya said, and cross-referenced his foundation's public filings. Kim blinked. "And how old are you again?" "Old enough to read between the lines." He leaned back, eyebrows raised. "If this is true, it's more than a story. It's a scandal." Grace watched him carefully. "Will you publish it?" "Depends," he said. "Do you want exposure or change? Because if we lead with it too big, they'll crush the story before it breathes. But if we build pressure, start with the inconsistencies in the Foundation's education grants, we can force the board to investigate, quietly at first, then publicly." Maya nodded. "That's what I want." Daniel Kim reached into his bag and pulled out a voice recorder. "Then let's begin." Back in his office that night, Moreau was nursing a glass of scotch when his phone buzzed. He answered with a grunt. "There's chatter online," his communications director said. "A school paper in Queens published an article comparing your foundation's funding claims to actual school outcomes. Nothing explosive yet, but it's gaining traction." Where did they get that data?" "Looks like a local journalist picked it up." Daniel Kim. Moreau set down his glass, the clink echoing like a warning bell. "Tell legal to prepare a cease and desist," he snapped. "And dig up something on this Kim guy. If he has unpaid parking tickets, I want to know." As he hung up, he walked back to the window, the city lights now colder than usual. He knew the game. And the game was shifting. 2 days later, Maya opened her locker to find a white envelope taped to the inside. Inside was a single sheet. "Be careful what dragons you wake." There was no signature. She stared at the words. Not afraid, just aware. That night, she showed it to her mother. "Do we call someone?" Grace asked. "Not yet," Maya said. "If they're warning me, it means they're watching. That means they're nervous." Grace knelt beside her. "This isn't a school project, Maya. These people fight dirty." I know," Maya said. "But so do I. I just use truth instead of fear." And in the darkness of their small apartment, with the fridge humming quietly and the world watching without knowing yet, the real war had begun, not with weapons or lawyers, but with a girl, her mother, and a truth too loud to ignore. The following week brought a shift that even Maya hadn't anticipated. What began as murmurs in local newsletters was now bubbling across education blogs. and community forums. Parents in neighboring districts began asking questions. School board members started receiving emails. The Ledger article was reprinted by 3 independent blogs, and someone had anonymously uploaded a datasheet linking Moreau's education grants to consulting firms with overlapping board members, many of them shell companies. At Brookstone Academy, teachers whispered in corners, avoiding eye contact when Maya walked by. Her name was no longer whispered, it was avoided, like a flame that burned too close. One afternoon, Principal Henley called Grace into his office. "I just want to talk," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his desk. Grace sat slowly, eyes steady. "There's a sense of discomfort spreading through the staff," he said. "They're concerned your daughter's involvement in this investigation could put the school in a difficult position." "Oh, my daughter is a student here," Grace replied, "and so far, everything she's done has been outside of these walls." Henley shifted in his seat. "I understand that. But you can see how the optics—" "No," Grace cut in. "I see how silence has always served people like Mr. Moreau. But not anymore." Henley gave a tight smile. "We're not trying to silence anyone." "Good," Grace said, rising. "Because she's not planning to stop." That evening, Maya sat at the kitchen table, piecing together timelines from 3 different grant cycles. A half-eaten grilled cheese sat beside her laptop. Grace walked in, placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You've stirred up more than dust," she said. "Then maybe it was too clean to begin with," Maya answered, not looking up. Grace pulled out a chair, sat down. "I had a meeting with Henley," she said. Maya looked up, concerned. "He's nervous," Grace continued. "They all are." Maya pushed her laptop aside. "Should I slow down?" Grace exhaled. "I think you should keep going. But you need to protect yourself. These people don't just push back, they erase." Maya nodded solemnly. "That's why I made backups." Grace blinked. "Backups?" "In 3 cloud drives," Maya said. "With encryption. And I emailed one to Mr. Kim with instructions in case anything happens." Grace swallowed. "What do you mean, in case anything happens?" "Just being careful," Maya replied, her tone too calm for her age. The next morning, Grace found a note stuck to her locker at work. "Keep your daughter in line. Last warning." No signature, just thick black marker on torn notebook paper. She crushed it in her hand, heart pounding. But when she looked around the hallway, no one was watching. No one seemed to know or care. Later that day, a package arrived at their apartment with no return address. Inside was a toy, a chessboard. But the queen piece was missing. Grace showed it to Maya that night. "They're trying to scare you," Maya said, turning the box over in her hands. "They think this is a game." "It's not," Grace said. "And you're not a piece." "No," Maya said. "I'm the player." Across the city, Daniel Kim's editor at the Ledger approved a new series. The Moreau files would publish every Friday, starting with the most damning discovery yet, that a full 27% of Moreau Foundation's operating budget was funneled through a silent partner firm that didn't exist 2 years ago. Daniel called Maya the night before the release. "They'll come after me next," he said. "Probably accuse me of bias." Maya's voice was calm. "Tell the truth louder than they can lie." He chuckled. "You sound like someone who's done this before." I'm just getting started." On the day the article dropped, Maya arrived at school to find her locker open. Her books were gone. In their place, a photo had been taped inside. Her face, taken from behind a bush near their apartment. She stood frozen for a second. Then she calmly tore it down, folded it, and walked to the principal's office. Inside, she laid the photo on Henley's desk. "This was in my locker," she said, "and I want it documented." Henley stared at the photo, his jaw tight. "Maya, I don't need comfort," she interrupted. "I need accountability." He sighed. "We'll review the cameras." Maya nodded once, turned, and walked out. Later that day, she called Daniel. "I'm ready for the next phase," she said. "You sure? It gets uglier from here." "I'm sure." The next Friday, the second article in the Moreau files was more personal. It exposed internal emails suggesting the foundation chose donation sites based not on need, but on visibility and real estate investment potential nearby. One email read, "A school near that corner would make great PR, especially if we break ground on the condos by spring." The response online was swift. Community leaders called for investigations. A city council member tweeted support for an independent audit. Hashtags began to trend. Number Moro money. Number Maya was right. Back at the apartment, Maya scrolled through the reactions with mixed emotions. Validation was satisfying, but the backlash was growing. Grace walked in with 2 mugs of tea. "You're making them nervous." "Good," Maya said. "That means the truth is working." Grace sat beside her. "But baby, are you okay?" Maya looked at her. "I'm tired. But I'm not stopping." There was a knock at the door. Grace opened it cautiously. Outside stood a woman in a dark blue coat, official badge in hand. "Miss Grace Jackson?" "I'm Agent Ramirez with the Department of Education's Inspector General's office." "May I come in?" Grace stepped aside, confused but alert. Ramirez turned to Maya. "You're the girl who found the trail, aren't you?" Maya stood slowly, her heart thudding. "Yes," she said. Ramirez nodded. "We've read your reports, and we believe you've uncovered something worth investigating." "AG?" Maya exchanged a glance with her mother. Grace asked softly, "Is this help or trouble?" Ramirez smiled. "That depends on what you want it to be." Maya took a breath. "I want it to be justice." The living room was quiet, save for the ticking of the small clock above the window. Grace had made tea, but neither she nor Agent Ramirez had touched their cups. Maya sat upright on the edge of the couch, a notebook in her lap, her pen poised as if she were interviewing the federal agent rather than the other way around. Agent Ramirez leaned forward slightly, her expression composed but earnest. "Maya, the documentation you collected is impressive. You have more organized data than some seasoned auditors I've worked with." Maya nodded politely. "Thank you. But it's not just data. It's patterns." Grace's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her cup, but she steadied herself. "What does this mean for us?" "It means," Ramirez said, "we have enough to formally open a preliminary inquiry into the Moreau Foundation. But to proceed, we'll need to gather original documents, bank transfers, email correspondences, meeting notes. Some of what Maya found is public, but the rest is circumstantial, unless we can back it up." "I can help," Maya offered quickly. "I have IP addresses. Some files were accessed from the same server location over and over Brookstone Academy's administration server." Grace's eyes widened. "Are you saying our school is involved?" Ramirez nodded. "There's a trail. Several of Moreau's programs used Brookstone as a showcase partner charity events, grant launches, even photo ops. If doctored records were funneled through that school, it makes them a node in the larger scheme." Maya bit her lip. "So how do we get the rest of what you need?" Ramirez hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. Any files on the school's internal servers are protected by policy. We'd need a warrant or a whistleblower." Grace stood up, her voice firm. "You're not using my daughter for that." "I wasn't going to ask," Ramirez replied. "But you should know someone else may already be trying to clean their tracks. If the files disappear, so does your chance for justice." The clock ticked louder now. Maya scribbled a note, then looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. If this were an adult, some accountant or teacher, would you be asking them to wait?" Ramirez smiled sadly. "No. Then don't ask me." That night, Maya opened her school laptop and accessed the student portal. She'd always found the cracks in Brookstone's firewalls, the flaws nobody thought a kid would notice. Using a proxy tunnel and a pair of old admin passwords she'd seen once in the faculty lounge printer logs, she gained limited access to the internal server. It wasn't illegal, not yet, just unnoticed. And what she found made her heart pound. Multiple files labeled with vague names. Event Planning A, Logistics B, Outreach Folder 2021. But within them, more detailed PDFs, including scanned invoices from Moreau's consulting companies billed directly to Brookstone Academy under administrative partnership fees. She copied everything. saved it to her encrypted drive. And just before midnight, she emailed it first to Ramirez, then to Daniel Kim. She turned off the laptop, leaned back, and whispered, "Your move, Mr. Moreau." The next morning, Principal Henley's voice came over the intercom during homeroom. "Maya Williams, please report to the main office." The entire room turned to look at her. Maya stood, head high, and walked the hallway with the same calm she'd shown the day she translated Moreau's document, but her hands were sweating. Inside the office, Henley wasn't alone. Beside him sat Miss Vega, head of school operations, and a man in a dark suit Maya had never seen before. "Maya," Henley said, forcing a tight smile, "please, sit down." She did. "This is Mr. Faulkner," he gestured toward the suited man. "He's been hired as an independent consultant to assess the integrity of the school's digital systems." Faulkner looked at her over steepled fingers. "Tell me, Maya, have you accessed any administrative files recently?" "Why?" Maya asked. "Because," Vega said, folding her arms, "doing so would be a serious violation of school policy, and it could result in suspension." Maya looked at all three adults. "I haven't done anything illegal," she said, "but I have uncovered evidence that this school has been used as a front for financial fraud." Henley's smile dropped. "Don't," Maya added, "pretend you didn't know. Some of those invoices were signed by your assistant, dated during school breaks, events that never happened." Vega leaned forward. "You're 12. You don't know what you're looking at." I know what math looks like," Maya said. "And I know what theft smells like." Faulkner stood. "We'll be reviewing your school account. In the meantime, you're suspended pending investigation." Henley didn't look at her. He just adjusted his tie. Maya stood. "I'll be out for how long?" "A week," Vega snapped. Maya smiled. "Perfect. That's all I need." She turned and walked out, not a single glance backward. That evening, Grace sat in the living room, Maya's suspension notice in her hand. She wasn't angry, she was burning with a different kind of fire. "I want to go to the press myself," she said. "I'll call a press conference outside the school. Tell the world they suspended a child for exposing the truth. They're hoping we get loud," Maya said softly. "So they can call us emotional. Unstable." Grace looked at her. "So what do we do?" "We wait for the agents," Maya replied. "I gave them what they needed. The evidence is in." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from Ramirez. "We have the files. Warrant issued. Agents moving in 72 hours. Be safe." Maya showed the phone to her mother. Grace exhaled deeply. 3 days. 3 days, Maya repeated. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Grace whispered, "You're not just a girl anymore." Maya looked at her, eyes fierce. "I was never just a girl." Laurent Moreau's fingers trembled slightly as he held the morning edition of the East Village Ledger. The headline was stark. Unflinching. Federal investigation into Moreau Foundation launched. Student whistleblower sparks audit. Below the title, a photo of Maya stood in grayscale, her eyes sharp, her shoulders squared. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. The story had already said everything. In his penthouse office, Moreau tossed the paper onto the conference table. Around him sat his board members, flanked by lawyers and public relations consultants. "This," he growled, "is a crisis, and it started with a child." "She's not just a child anymore," muttered Celeste, his senior legal counsel. "She's become a symbol," Moreau scoffed. "Symbol of what? Audacity? Of accountability," she said quietly. A hush fell over the room. He stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "I want damage control. Now. Make calls. Find anyone willing to say she fabricated the documents." Another board member shifted uncomfortably. "We can't suppress this one, Laurent. The warrant's public. They're auditing our servers next week. The Department of Education's Office of Inspector General is involved." Moreau clenched his jaw. "Then make sure they find nothing." Meanwhile, at the Jackson apartment, Maya sat at the small table with Agent Ramirez and 2 other investigators. Her laptop was open, showing folders she'd named carefully. Event discrepancies. Invoice conflicts. Shell companies. Grace hovered nearby, arms crossed. eyes narrowed with protective instinct. I didn't just collect evidence, Maya explained. I categorized the lies. The patterns. Ramirez looked impressed, but she also looked worried. You do realize what happens next, right? When we act, this story won't just be local anymore. It'll be national. He'll come at you harder than ever. Grace stepped in. She's not doing this alone, Maya nodded. And I'm not afraid of being loud anymore. The older investigator, a tall man with silver at his temples, leaned forward. Miss Williams, I've worked dozens of whistleblower cases. Most of them fall apart when the public turns. When the threats come in, are you prepared for that? Maya looked him straight in the eye. They already tried. Letters. Photos. Intimidation. They threw everything at me, except the truth. He nodded slowly. All right then. We'll keep you updated. That same evening, Maya checked her email and found a message from Daniel Kim. Subject, urgent, anonymous source, reached out. Body, Maya. Someone claiming to be a former accountant from Moreau Foundation sent me internal memos. Not sure if they're legit yet, but they mention payouts to 2 school officials at Brookstone. Looks like hush money. I'll keep digging. Be careful. Maya stared at the screen, her mind racing. If what he said was true, it meant someone inside her own school had not only known but profited from the deception. She printed the email, folded it, and slid it into the manila folder she now carried everywhere. Her version of armor. Across the city, in a high-rise with mirrored windows, Principal Henley sat at his desk, sweating. He had just finished shredding 3 folders when a knock came at his door. It was Miss Vega. You got the call too? She asked, her voice low. He nodded. They're coming Monday. Full review. All financials, internal memos, server backups. She closed the door behind her. Henley, did you sign anything? He swallowed. Just the partnership invoices. They were labeled strategic alignment. I thought it was legit. You thought wrong. He looked at her, his voice brittle. What about you? She didn't answer. Vega, he said more firmly, if this goes public, we lose everything. We already have, she whispered, to a girl with a notebook. Back at Brookstone Academy, students buzzed with gossip. Though Maya was still suspended, her absence made her presence even louder. Ava and 2 other girls sat in the courtyard, passing Maya's printed speech between them. One boy pulled it from his backpack and taped it to his locker. Another read it aloud during literature class when the teacher asked for examples of persuasive writing. Even some teachers began to soften. Mr. Price assigned The Souls of Black Folk for the next unit. Mrs. Carter rewrote her lesson plan to include contemporary youth activism. The atmosphere had changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but like a tide that could no longer be ignored. On Sunday evening, just before bed, Maya and Grace sat quietly, flipping through a photo album they hadn't opened in years. There were pictures of Maya as a toddler, of Grace in her janitor uniform holding her baby girl outside their first apartment building. Grace stopped at a picture of Maya in kindergarten, holding a book almost as tall as her. You've always had your nose in something, she said with a smile. I was looking for something even then, Maya replied. Grace looked at her, eyes glistening. And what are you looking for now? Maya closed the album gently. Proof that one voice is enough. That night, Laurent Moreau sat in a dark office, his empire trembling. He had always believed his money made him untouchable. But now, every strategy felt futile. He clicked through the latest article Daniel Kim had published. This one included a leaked memo confirming Vega and Henley had been paid under the table. It was unraveling. He poured another drink, hands shaking. Somewhere in the city, a 12-year-old girl had become the one thing he couldn't buy: silence, manipulate, or destroy. She had become undeniable, and for the first time in decades, Laurent Moreau felt something unfamiliar: defeat. Monday morning arrived heavy with anticipation. Clouds hung low over Brooklyn, casting a silvery gloom on the city below. But inside the halls of Brookstone Academy, the atmosphere was electric. The whispers weren't just rumors anymore, they were truth, verified and printed, unfolding in real time. At 9:04 a.m., Two unmarked black sedans pulled into the school parking lot. Out stepped 4 federal investigators from the Department of Education's Office of Inspector General. Clipboards in hand, briefcases tucked beneath their arms, they looked more like financial surgeons than government agents. Principal Henley stood by the main entrance, his smile painfully rehearsed. "Welcome to Brookstone," he said, holding out a hand. "We're happy to cooperate fully." The lead agent, Ramirez, didn't take his hand. "We're here to conduct a full audit of Brookstone Academy's financial partnerships, specifically those involving the Moreau Foundation." Henley swallowed hard. "Of course, my office is ready for you." Inside, chaos moved behind closed doors. Staff members whispered frantically in stairwells. Vega locked herself in her office for an hour before finally emerging, her expression brittle and hollow. In the teacher's lounge, Mr. Price looked up from his coffee as the agents passed. "She really did it," he whispered to himself. "The girl actually cracked it open." Meanwhile, Maya sat at the kitchen table, books and papers spread around her like an island of quiet purpose. Though still suspended, she had dressed as if going to school, pressed jeans, clean blouse, hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Grace watched her from the couch, unsure whether to be proud or terrified. "You think they'll find everything?" Maya asked without looking up. "They'll find enough," Grace said. "You gave them the map." Maya nodded. "Then it's time they follow it." At that moment, her phone vibrated. A message from Daniel Kim. They just walked into Brookstone. Full audit underway. "Also, I got a call from NBC. They want to interview you." Maya read the message twice, then looked at her mother. "They want me on television." Grace's brow furrowed. "Are you ready for that?" "I'm not sure," Maya admitted, "but I think it's part of what comes next." Grace nodded slowly. "Then we'll make sure you're prepared." Back at Brookstone, the audit was underway. Files were pulled. Server access was granted. Ramirez and her team reviewed every financial entry linked to student support services and external partnership grants. One folder raised red flags instantly. Dozens of invoices labeled as consulting, with vague service descriptions, community engagement review, curriculum consultation, outreach planning, each attached to 5-figure payments routed to shell corporations. Ramirez held up one of the documents. "This one's dated during winter break. School was closed." Another agent added, "This one was paid the day after a Moreau gala. No meeting minutes, no attendance logs." Ramirez turned to Vega. "Where's your ledger?" Vega's lips pressed into a thin line. "Digital only." "Show me," Ramirez said. They accessed the system, but something had changed. 3 folders were missing. Ramirez turned slowly toward Henley. "Who has administrator access?" Henley didn't answer. The tension in the room cracked like glass. By midday, word had spread. Parents began calling the school. Reporters waited outside the front gates, cameras ready, questions sharp. Ava texted Maya a photo of the scene. 3 agents escorting boxes of documents from the front office. Maya stared at the image, heart racing. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, overlooked in the name of charity that served power more than people. That evening, Daniel Kim arrived at the Jackson apartment, a camera crew in tow. He wore a navy blazer and carried a binder with carefully outlined interview questions. "I know this is a lot," he said gently. "We'll keep it simple. Just speak your truth." Maya sat in front of the window, the golden hue of the setting sun lighting her face. The camera rolled. "Can you tell us your name and age?" "Maya Williams," she said clearly. 12 years old. What made you start looking into the Moreau Foundation?" "I was cleaning up after a gala with my mom. Someone gave her a document in French, assuming she couldn't read it. I could. And what I read didn't match what they were saying. So I started asking questions. What do you hope people learn from this?" Maya paused. "That speaking up matters. That being young doesn't mean being blind. And that power doesn't protect you when the truth comes out." Kim nodded, visibly moved. "Last question, are you scared?" Maya's voice didn't tremble. "I was, but not anymore, because I'm not alone." Grace stood just off camera, a hand over her mouth, eyes full of pride. The interview aired that night. Across New York and eventually the country, viewers watched a composed young girl speak with a clarity that pierced through political noise and legal jargon. By morning, Maya Williams was trending. Not as a meme, not as a victim, but as a force. Laurent Moreau watched the interview from a private suite in Manhattan, the television volume low, the weight in his chest heavy. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He knew what came next. The board would demand answers. The donors would vanish. The empire would crumble, not with an explosion, but with a steady unraveling pulled loose by the smallest hands. He turned off the screen. His reflection stared back from the black glass. This time he couldn't look away. 3 days after the audit began, the Department of Education released a public statement confirming irregularities in the financial practices of the Moreau Foundation and its affiliated education partnerships. Brookstone Academy was named in the report. The media had a field day. News anchors used phrases like systemic misuse, deliberate obfuscation, and gross ethical breaches. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Talk shows invited policy experts, education reformers, and community leaders. And through it all, Maya Williams's name echoed like a pulse through the storm. Grace watched it all unfold from their living room, remote in one hand, Maya's tea in the other. Maya had barely left her room all morning, not out of fear, but exhaustion. The phone rang almost non-stop. Reporters, attorneys, old teachers, distant relatives. Grace answered only a few. At last, Maya emerged, hoodie up, socks mismatched, a worn paperback in her hand. "You okay?" Grace asked. Maya nodded slowly. "I'm just tired of seeing my face everywhere." Grace walked over, wrapping her in a gentle hug. "You're not a headline. You're my daughter." They sat on the couch. Maya opened the book Dubois again, but her eyes didn't move across the page. "I thought it would feel different," she said softly. "What did you think it would feel like?" "Like winning," she whispered. Grace held her a little tighter. "Sometimes justice doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surviving. And surviving well is a kind of revolution too." At Brookstone Academy, the fallout was immediate. Principal Henley was placed on administrative leave. Miss Vega resigned 2 days later, citing personal reasons. Students gathered outside the building in quiet protest, holding signs, "Believe the kids, justice for the truth." Maya was right. Ava led one of the marches, carrying a copy of Maya's ledger interview. Other students began emailing their district officials, asking for curriculum changes, community forums, and transparency in how school funds were used. Even the most disinterested students started paying attention. The administration scrambled to contain the wave. Meanwhile, at Moreau Global Holdings, the board convened for an emergency session. Laurent Moreau sat at the head of the table, though his posture no longer carried its usual command. Several board members wore expressions that hovered between disgust and desperation. "We've lost 3 major donors," Celeste reported flatly. 2 investment partners have pulled out of the upcoming tech park deal. And the IRS has officially opened a secondary inquiry. Moreau didn't flinch. "We'll recover. We always do." Another member leaned forward. "No, Laurent. You may not recover. We've built this brand on clean philanthropy, innovation, and education. Right now, your name threatens all 3. I built this company," he snapped. "And now you're sinking it." Celeste cleared her throat. "There's a motion on the table. Effective immediately, the board proposes to relieve Laurent Moreau of his executive duties pending the outcome of federal investigations." He stood, glaring at each face. "You'll regret this," he hissed. But no one looked away. The vote was unanimous. 2 days later, Maya returned to Brookstone Academy. Students paused as she walked through the gates, her backpack slung low, her stride calm. Teachers smiled nervously. Some nodded with real respect. Mr. Price clapped once as she passed his classroom. Afa ran up beside her. "They're already talking about renaming the library after you," she said, grinning. "Please don't," Maya groaned. Ava laughed. "Too late. There's a student petition." At her locker, she found a note taped to the inside. "Thank you for reminding us that courage doesn't need a title, Mr. Price." Maya smiled for the first time in days. In homeroom, the teacher paused when Maya entered. The room went silent. "Welcome back, Miss Williams," the teacher said gently. The class erupted into quiet applause. Not loud, not theatrical, but steady. Real. That evening, Daniel Kim visited again. This time, without cameras. "I wanted to give you this," he said, placing a printed mock-up of the Ledger's next issue on the table. The cover showed Maya walking beside Grace, both holding hands as they stepped into the school. The title read, "Daughter, Fighter, Future." Maya stared at it. Daniel sat beside her. "We're closing the series next week. But the editors want to do a final piece. Your words. Your voice." Grace looked at her daughter. "You don't have to say yes." "I want to," Maya said. "But not for me." "Oh," Daniel tilted his head. "For who then?" "For every kid who thinks silence is the safest choice. For the janitor's daughter. For the boy who doesn't speak up because he's afraid. For the girl who thinks being smart makes her a target." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then let's write it together." In the weeks that followed, the Department of Education formally recommended a complete audit overhaul of every private-public education partnership in the state. Brookstone Academy was placed under provisional oversight, with a new interim principal selected by a community board. Moreau Foundation was suspended from all public grants. Their social media accounts went dark. Their buildings emptied, and in a quiet press conference, attended by local and national media, Laurent Moreau stood behind a podium, visibly smaller than ever before. "I regret the choices made under my leadership," he said, voice low. "I was blind to actions that occurred under my watch. I accept the board's decision. I will cooperate fully." There was no applause, only the clicking of cameras and the quiet turning of pages as reporters took notes. Back home, Maya sat at the kitchen table, typing the last words of her op-ed. "I didn't do this alone. My mother stood behind me. My community gave me strength. And the truth gave me something no amount of money could ever buy. A reason to speak. And to keep speaking." "Oh." She hit send. Grace walked over with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You're not finished, are you?" Maya shook her head. "I think I'm just getting started." The days following Maya's final op-ed felt different, as if the city itself had taken a breath and held it, waiting for what might come next. Though the investigation continued behind government walls and locked server rooms, the world outside had started to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. At Brookstone Academy, changes became visible fast. The teachers' lounge, once tense and territorial, now buzzed with discussions about ethics, transparency, and reform. A new board-appointed interim principal, Mrs. Lena Whitmore, a retired educator known for her fierce integrity, addressed the entire student body in the auditorium. "I've read every file. I've seen the damage that silence has caused. Starting today, we rebuild not from the top down, but from the voices that were once ignored. You have my word. You will be heard." In the audience, Maya sat near the back, hands folded, eyes steady. She didn't need applause. The silence that followed the principal's words carried more weight than any cheer could. Outside, the school entrance now displayed a bronze plaque commemorating the values of integrity, courage, and truth. Though it didn't bear Maya's name, everyone knew who had inspired it. One evening, a letter arrived at the Jackson apartment. It was postmarked from Washington, D.C., stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Education. Grace opened it slowly, unfolding the trifolded stationery. Maya leaned in to read over her shoulder. "Dear Maya Williams, your contributions to the exposure of systemic misuse within the Moreau Foundation have prompted the department to reevaluate several oversight mechanisms in federal and state-level education grants. Your courage has set a precedent. We are formally inviting you to speak at the National Youth Forum on Ethics and Education Reform in Washington this summer. Your story will help shape the future of accountability in our schools." Beneath the signature was a handwritten note. "Most people wait decades to make a difference. You did it at 12. Maya stared at the letter, silent. Grace touched her shoulder. "They want you to speak." "I know," Maya whispered. "But not just speak. Represent." Meanwhile, Daniel Kim's final installment of the Ledger series had gone viral. Syndicated nationally, it appeared on screens from Harlem to Houston, from classrooms to coffee shops. Emails flooded the paper's inbox. Educators thanking Maya for reminding them why they entered the profession. Students confessing that they, too, had seen things they were once too afraid to question, and parents pledging to become more engaged in their children's schools. Daniel sat back at his desk after publishing the final piece, watching the real-time responses roll in. A quiet pride settled over him, not for the articles themselves, but for having played a part in amplifying the voice that mattered most. He picked up the phone and called Grace. She changed more than a school, he said. She reminded people that the truth still matters. Grace smiled softly. She reminded me too. The next week, Maya returned to school full-time. The suspension had been overturned. Her academic record cleared. More than that, her new schedule included a weekly seminar on civic ethics, an idea proposed by a group of students and fast-tracked by the interim principal. Maya was the youngest member of the class, yet she spoke with clarity that surpassed her years. One afternoon, after the seminar, a shy boy approached her in the hallway. "Hey," he mumbled, "my brother. He said you're the reason our mom got her job back. She was let go from one of Moreau's partner companies last year." Maya blinked. "She got it back?" He nodded. "They said it was wrongful termination." She cried when she got the call. Maya smiled faintly. "Tell her I'm glad she's home." At home, Grace had started looking into night classes again. For years, she'd placed Maya's needs ahead of her own dreams. But now, with the eyes of the city opened and the weight on her shoulders lightened, she dared to imagine again. She sat at the table filling out forms while Maya typed away beside her. "Thinking about nursing," Grace said casually. "Always loved helping people." Maya looked up, beaming. "You'd be amazing." Grace chuckled. "We'd be quite the duo, huh? You fight the systems, I patch the wounds." "Sounds like a plan." They laughed, and for once, the sound filled the room without being chased by tension. The next month brought one final surprise. A handwritten envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a simple note. "I made a mistake. I underestimated you. Thank you for proving me wrong." There was no apology, no plea for forgiveness. But it was something. A recognition. An echo of defeat. Maya read it, then tucked it into the back of her journal. "Let him keep his pride," she said. "I've got the truth." Spring turned to summer. Maya packed for Washington with a mix of nerves and excitement. She stood at the window one last time before leaving. Watching the city she had helped change at least a little, Grace handed her a carry-on and kissed her forehead. "You know, for someone who once cried over spelling bees, you've come a long way." Maya laughed. "I still hate spelling. You love the truth more." They hugged tightly, and then, with her backpack slung over her shoulder and courage tucked into every corner of her soul, Maya walked out the door. She wasn't just going to tell her story. She was going to shape the future, one word at a time. The Capitol building loomed in the distance like a monument carved from time itself. Dignified and unmoving, Maya stood in the green room of the National Youth Forum on Ethics and Education Reform, adjusting the lapel mic clipped to her collar. Around her, teens from across the country rehearsed speeches, practiced smiles, and fidgeted with cue cards. But Maya wasn't nervous. Not because the moment wasn't big, but because it was real. The forum organizers had seated her last on the day's speaker schedule. To close with resonance. As one coordinator put it. It meant hours of waiting, of listening, of anticipation building in quiet waves. Grace sat in the audience, eyes focused, heart thudding with every new face that took the stage. The moderator, a poised woman in a burgundy suit, finally approached Maya backstage. "Ready?" Maya exhaled. "Let's go." As her name was announced, Maya Williams, age 12, Brooklyn, New York. A murmur passed through the audience. Many had read her op-ed. Some had followed the trial that exposed the Moreau Foundation, but this was their first time seeing her in person. She walked onto the stage, head high, shoulders steady. No notes, no podium, just her voice. "I want to tell you about a mop bucket," she began. It was blue, chipped along the edges. My mom pushed it through ballrooms filled with people too important to notice her. The room stilled. I was just helping her clean up after an event. That's all. But then someone handed her a document. French, expensive, foreign. They didn't think she could read it. They didn't think I could read it either. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the room. They were right about one thing. My mom couldn't read it, but I could. And what I read didn't sit right. She paced gently, hands open. I didn't set out to be a whistleblower. I just had questions. And when I didn't get answers, I went looking. And when I found the truth, I spoke it. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd, and they tried to punish me for that. Suspend me. Discredit me. Silence me. But here's what they didn't understand. Justice doesn't come from the top. It starts in the quiet, ordinary places. The broom closets, the school cafeterias, the classrooms, the kitchen tables. Grace wiped her eyes from the third row. I'm 12. But I've seen what power does when it forgets people. And I've seen what truth does when people remember who they are. She finished with one line, simple and sure. Sometimes the smallest voice is the one you remember most. Silence, then applause long, rising, rolling. Not the kind given for a child who'd memorized a speech, but for someone who had lived every word. After the forum, attendees lined up to speak with her. Students thanked her. Teachers shared their own battles with bureaucracy. One congresswoman leaned in and whispered, "You just shook this building a little." Maya smiled politely, but her eyes were far away. She wasn't thinking about the praise. She was thinking about what still needed fixing. Later that evening, as they walked the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Grace wrapped her arm around Maya's shoulders. "You know what you are?" she asked. Maya looked up. "Un hecho." Maya blinked. "What do you mean? You said something true and strong." Now it's bouncing off walls all across this country. They stood in silence under the stone gaze of Lincoln, night settling around them like velvet. Back in New York, news of Maya's speech traveled fast. Clips were shared across social media. Educators reposted quotes. Advocacy groups reached out, asking for her participation in roundtables, panels, podcasts. Some called her the future of education reform. Others just called her brave. And yet, with all the noise, Maya stayed grounded. She returned to school, returned to her routine, returned to the life of a 12-year-old girl who now had a bigger lens through which she saw the world. One afternoon, while organizing books in the library, Ava walked in, holding a flyer. "You got invited to a United Nations Youth Summit," she said breathlessly. "It's in Geneva." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Switzerland? Girl, you're global." Maya laughed. "Tell that to my math homework." Still, when she got home that evening, she placed the flyer on the table and stared at it. Not with disbelief, but with a quiet understanding. The truth didn't stop at borders. A week later, Daniel Kim called. "We're compiling a book," he said. "A collection of stories like yours, youth-led justice efforts. Your story would be the anchor." Maya paused. "Only if I can write my chapter myself." "Absolutely," he said. "We wouldn't have it any other way." That weekend, Grace and Maya visited the community center where Grace used to mop floors. It had been renovated recently, new tiles, fresh paint, brighter lighting, but the old stage in the back room still stood. Maya stepped onto it, looking out at the empty chairs. Grace stood near the doorway, watching her daughter soak in the space. "I used to imagine giving a speech here," Maya said. "To 3 people. Maybe 4. And now?" Maya smiled. "I speak to rooms filled with strangers, but I still see you in the front row." Grace's voice cracked. "Always." They stood there, generations colliding in silence. One born from labor, one from language, both carrying the same flame. Justice. The fall semester arrived with crisp air and golden leaves brushing against the windows of Brookstone Academy. Maya had changed since the beginning of the year, but so had the school. The walls still echoed with footsteps and locker doors. But beneath the usual rhythm was something different. Attentiveness, respect, and most of all, awareness. The school now had an integrity hour every Friday morning, where students could voice concerns anonymously, ask difficult questions, or bring up community issues. It wasn't perfect. Some teachers grumbled. Some students still rolled their eyes. But the room was always full. On one of those Fridays, Maya sat quietly near the back. She didn't speak often during these sessions, she had said enough. But she listened. And that mattered more now. A boy named Jeremy stood up, his voice trembling. My cousin dropped out of his school in the Bronx because of the same kind of fake program Maya exposed. They promised college prep. But it was just computers with no teachers. There was a beat of silence. Then murmurs of agreement. Another student raised her hand. Is there a way to help them? Mrs. Whitmore, the interim principal, stepped in gently. That's the kind of question we built this forum to ask. Not just, what's broken, but what can we do next? Maya leaned forward, writing Jeremy's story in her notebook. Outside the classroom, change stirred at a larger scale. Daniel Kim's upcoming book, Voices Without Permission, was in the final editing stages. Maya's chapter, now titled The Mop Bucket and the Microphone, had already drawn early praise from critics who previewed the manuscript. One excerpt began circulating online. They wanted me to feel small. But what they didn't realize is that small things grow into questions, into voices, into storms. It landed on blogs, teacher forums, and even slipped into the morning announcements at schools in Chicago, Oakland, and rural Kentucky. One teacher in Alabama wrote, "I printed it out and handed it to my 8th graders." One girl cried. One boy said, "I want to write something like this someday." Maya read that email twice, then a third time, then closed her laptop and sat quietly for a while. Meanwhile, the Department of Education had concluded its final investigation. The report, thick and damning, confirmed the misallocation of nearly $12 million in Moreau Foundation's school-based partnerships. Several administrators across multiple institutions faced termination, prosecution, or both. Henley and Vega were officially barred from working in any educational institution that received federal funding. Laurent Moreau's personal assets were frozen pending trial, but he never spoke publicly again. His final press appearance remained that stiff, wordless apology months earlier. Since then, he had vanished from headlines. No foundation, no photos, just a faint name behind a scandal that had outgrown him. And yet, for Maya, the story was never about his downfall. It was about the awakening. Back in Brooklyn, Maya began tutoring students at the community center. Just once a week, for now mostly English, sometimes history. She didn't advertise it. She didn't want to be anyone's hero. She just wanted to help. One Saturday, a girl named Kiara came to her session, eyes guarded, arms crossed. "My mom said you're the girl who brought down the millionaires," Kiara said. Maya smiled softly. "I just asked questions no one else wanted to." Kiara sat down slowly. "I don't think I'm good at school." "You don't have to be good at all of it," Maya said. "Just curious about something." Kiara blinked. "Like what?" "Anything. Music, codes, language, truth. Once you find that one thing you can't stop thinking about, the rest follows." Kiara picked up a pencil. "Okay, then let's start with truth." Later that week, Maya and Grace walked home from the grocery store, their bags light, their pace slow. "You've changed," Grace said. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Good changed?" Grace nodded. "The kind of change that lasts." They paused near the bus stop where Grace used to wait every night after her janitor shifts. "You remember the time that man called me invisible when I was mopping that banquet hall?" Grace asked suddenly. Maya frowned. "I do." He didn't say it to my face. But he said it loud enough. Like I was meant to hear it. I hated that night." Grace smiled faintly. "Me too. But now, that same banquet hall has your quote framed in the lobby." Maya blinked. "What?" "I saw it last week. They held a diversity leadership event there. Your name was under the quote." "What did it say?" Grace took a deep breath. "The difference between silence and dignity is the courage to speak even when you're the smallest person in the room." Maya said nothing. Her mother didn't need her to. They kept walking. Back home, Maya opened her journal and flipped past the old sketches, charts, and coded notes from the investigation days. She started a new page. This time, it wasn't about corruption or exposés. It was titled, "The Next Voice, She listed names of students she had met, stories they told, questions they had asked. It wasn't a report. It was a map, not of where justice had already been, but where it needed to go next. And just like before, she wasn't waiting for permission to follow it. Autumn deepened. Trees shed their fiery leaves as winds curled around Brooklyn's stoops and alleyways. But inside the Jackson apartment, warmth simmered not just from the oven or Grace's spicy gumbo, but from the quiet rhythm of a home at peace with itself. One evening, as Maya sat rereading her journal entries from the summer, a letter slid through the mail slot. Grace picked it up from the floor, brows lifting when she saw the sender. "City Hall," she said. "You expecting something from the mayor's office?" Maya looked up, surprised. "No." She opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the heavy cardstock. "Dear Miss Maya Williams, in recognition of your civic courage and contribution to educational reform, we are pleased to invite you to serve as the youngest ever youth advisor to the New York City Commission on Educational Equity. Your voice, insight, and lived experience are urgently needed at the policy level." Maya's mouth parted slightly. Grace put a hand on her back. "That's real. That's not a scholarship. That's not a ribbon. That's a seat at the table." Ho! A week later, Maya entered City Hall with Grace beside her, and a new blazer clinging awkwardly to her shoulders. Her name was on the docket, nestled among politicians, superintendents, and CEOs. She was given a badge, a chair, and a stack of briefing papers taller than a textbook. During her first meeting, she didn't speak much. But she listened intently. She watched how language was shaped, how data was wielded, how well-meaning ideas died in the hands of bureaucracy. An older council member leaned toward her during a break. "First meeting can feel like a blizzard." Maya smiled politely. "I brought a shovel," he chuckled. "Good." At the next session, when a consultant presented a proposal to improve student voice initiatives, Maya raised her hand. "Do any of these recommendations come from students who attend schools like mine?" The room paused. "Well," the consultant began, "we surveyed several charter schools." Maya shook her head. "Charter schools don't operate under the same pressures." "Did you ask public school students from zip codes below the poverty line? Students who rely on their schools for 2 meals a day? Who walk through metal detectors every morning?" Silence. Then the deputy commissioner leaned forward. "Do you have recommendations?" Maya nodded. "Yes, but not from a consultant's binder. From the kids themselves." She opened a notebook and read aloud quotes she had gathered during her tutoring and integrity hours. "We don't want a speaker, we want a listener. Fixing schools shouldn't feel like cleaning up after other people's messes. I'm not a data point, I'm a student. I matter." The impact was immediate. From that moment on, Maya wasn't a symbolic voice in the room. She was a participant. Meanwhile, Grace had enrolled in her first night class, Introduction to Healthcare Systems. She studied late, surrounded by index cards and a chipped coffee mug. Maya quizzed her between dinner and bedtime, both of them laughing when Grace blanked on acronyms. One evening, Grace walked in with a proud smile and a test marked with a bold red A. Maya high-fived her. "Told you, you're not the only smart one in this house anymore," Grace teased. Their home, once filled with the silence of exhaustion, now echoed with ambition. In November, Maya received a call from a teacher at a middle school in Baltimore. The students had read her ledger op-ed in class. They wanted to start their own integrity hour, but needed help convincing administration. "Would you talk to them?" the teacher asked. "I'd be honored," Maya replied. Via Zoom, she addressed a class of 7th graders, seated in plastic chairs, their faces a mix of awe and nerves. She spoke simply, without pretense. "You don't need a foundation to start something," she said. "You just need a question that won't let you go." A student raised her hand. "What if they say we're too young to change anything?" Maya grinned. "Then they don't know what 12-year-olds can do." Later that week, Maya walked through the halls of Brookstone Academy. The bronze plaque outside the library now had a name: the Maya Williams Learning Commons. She had begged them not to use her name. They did anyway. Inside, students lounged on beanbags, collaborated on group projects, and pinned articles about justice and reform to a giant corkboard labeled "Voices Worth Hearing." Ava waved from across the room. You coming to ethics club? In a sec, Maya called back. She walked over to the window, looking out over the courtyard. Leaves swirled. Laughter rose from below. Behind her, a student approached. I saw your speech online, he said. I used to think none of this mattered, but now I think maybe it does. Maya turned. What's your name? Jared. Jared, it matters because you matter. He smiled shyly. Thanks. As he walked away, Maya opened her notebook and jotted down his name. The list on the page was growing. Not of problems, but of people, of voices, of stories that were waiting for someone to listen. And she would, because the microphone may have been passed on, but Maya Williams was still listening. Winter crept into Brooklyn quietly, dusting rooftops with snow and wrapping the streets in silver breath. Inside Brookstone Academy, heaters clanged and hummed as students shuffled through hallways in thick jackets and salt-stained boots. Maya Williams walked among them, no longer anonymous, yet never aloof. Fame had not changed her, it had simply sharpened her sense of purpose. It was during one of her tutoring sessions at the community center when Maya noticed something different about Kiara. The girl sat slouched, eyes unfocused, her notebook unopened. You okay? Maya asked, nudging a pencil toward her. Kiara shrugged. My cousin got kicked out of his place. Mom's letting him crash on our couch, so I sleep on the floor now. It's whatever. Maya said nothing for a beat. Then quietly, it's not whatever. Kiara looked up, eyes defensive. I mean, it shouldn't be normal, Maya said softly. But I get it. Kiara's gaze lingered. You really get it? I used to sleep in the closet when we had no heat. Closets don't have windows, so the cold didn't get in as bad. Silence passed between them. Real. Shared. Kiara straightened slightly. I got a D on my math quiz. My teacher said it's because I'm distracted. But she doesn't know I didn't eat breakfast. Maya closed her notebook. Then today, we don't do math. Today, we write a letter. Kiara blinked. To who? To your school. They need to know what it looks like to try and learn on an empty stomach. Later that evening, Maya brought the letter home and showed it to Grace. Her mother read it twice, jaw tightening. This child's voice matters, Grace said. But who's going to make sure someone hears it? You and me, Maya replied. Grace nodded. Then we start again. The next day, Maya called Daniel Kim. I need help publishing something not for me, but for someone else. Actually, for a lot of someone else's. Daniel listened carefully. What are you thinking? An anthology, Maya said. Student stories, essays, letters, whatever they've got. The title would be, Still Here, because people like Kiara, they haven't disappeared. They've just been ignored. Daniel's silence was brief and reverent. I'll talk to the publisher, he said. And Maya, that's the best title I've heard in years. By January, submissions began flooding in. Stories came from everywhere: Bronx, Detroit, Oakland, rural Kansas. Some were handwritten. Some typed on school Chromebooks. Some were drawings with captions. Some were rap lyrics scrawled on the back of detention slips. Maya read each one. A sixth grader from Mississippi wrote, I thought I was dumb because I couldn't read fast. Then I found out I have dyslexia. And no one ever tested me before. A student from the south side of Chicago shared. My principal said school lunch wasn't real food. I told him I'd still eat it. Because it's all I've got. Grace read over Maya's shoulder one night, wiping a tear. These stories matter, baby. Maya nodded. More than mine ever did. Grace looked at her. Yours lit the fuse. Now they're the fire. As the anthology project grew, so did resistance. Some administrators pushed back. One school sent a cease and desist letter, claiming that a student's story misrepresented institutional integrity. Daniel's publisher received anonymous threats. Even Maya's email inbox turned sour messages from critics, accusing her of spreading victimhood, of politicizing children. Maya took a breath, then opened a blank page. She titled it, When the Powerful Get Uncomfortable, and she began writing. Meanwhile, at City Hall, the Commission on Educational Equity was voting on a new proposal, one that Maya had helped draft. The Student Equity Grant Initiative would allocate microgrants to underfunded student-led projects across the 5 boroughs. Some commissioners balked at the cost. Maya stood. "You gave me a seat at this table," she said calmly. "And I'm grateful. But a seat means a voice, not just silence in fancy clothes. If you're worried about the money, then you should be worried about the cost of ignoring kids like Kiara. Because she's smart. And she's tired. And she's still showing up. We owe her more than excuses." The room went still. The vote passed narrowly, but it passed. That night, Grace cooked Maya's favorite meal, baked mac and cheese with sweet cornbread. They ate in pajamas, laughter bouncing off the walls. Their lives far removed from the anxiety that once clung to every dollar, every silence, every slammed door. As they cleaned up, Grace turned to her daughter. "Do you miss being just a kid?" Maya thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I don't want to go back." "Why not?" "Because I remember what it felt like to be invisible." Grace wrapped an arm around her. "You'll never be that again." The first print run of Still Here sold out in under 48 hours. Educators called it essential. Students called it, finally, something that sounds like us. It was reviewed in The Atlantic, cited in education policy meetings, placed on shelves next to Maya's op-ed collection. One reviewer wrote, "If Maya Williams was the wake-up call, these stories are the voices in the room saying, 'We've been awake this whole time.'" Maya didn't frame that review. She framed a letter from Kiara, scrawled in purple ink on notebook paper. "Thank you for showing me that I matter. I told my teacher I want to write a book one day. She said I should talk to you. So here I am. Talking. Writing. Still here." Maya taped it to her bedroom wall. Above it, she wrote in black marker, "Let no one fall into silence alone." A heavy snowfall blanketed the city by mid-February, frosting the tops of yellow cabs and blurring the skyline into a soft, white haze. But even with schools closing early and slush-choking sidewalks, Brookstone Academy remained open. There was too much momentum now, too many voices rising, too many plans underway to let a little cold stop them. Inside the warm halls of the school library, Maya sat at a round table, surrounded by students editing submissions for the second volume of Still Here. It was no longer just a project, it had become a movement. Ava, sipping cocoa, pointed at one essay with a red pen. "This line here? It cuts deep. I wear my hoodie up not because I'm hiding, but because I'm tired of explaining my hair. You feel that?" Maya nodded. "Yeah, keep it exactly like that." They continued working in silence, until Principal Whitmore knocked gently on the glass door. Her expression was unreadable. "Maya, can I speak with you for a moment?" Outside the room, the principal's tone turned grave. "There's something you need to be prepared for." Maya stiffened. Whitmore handed her a printed email. "It's from a lawyer representing the Moreau estate." Maya read it once, then again. "They're threatening to sue, for defamation?" "Yes. They claim your role in the first Ledger expose damaged Mr. Moreau's legacy and caused him irreparable reputational harm." Maya blinked. "He built that legacy on stolen money." Whitmore nodded solemnly. "We know. But people like him, they don't let the truth pass quietly." The news spread fast. Media outlets debated the ethics of suing a child activist. Some pundits claimed Maya was being used by adults with agendas. Others accused her of seeking attention. Daniel Kim called the house late that night. "Don't worry," he said. "This is scare tactics. It won't stick." Grace's voice was calm but sharp. "Even if it doesn't stick, it stains." Maya sat silently, watching the snow fall beyond the window. The warmth she'd been building, the trust, the invitations, the hope now trembled under the weight of a single accusation. She wasn't afraid, but she was tired. 2 days later, she appeared on a morning talk show, her first major interview since the Still Here release. The host, polished and polite, leaned across the table with carefully curated concern. "Maya, how does it feel to be at the center of a legal storm?" Maya answered without hesitation. "It feels like justice is being told to sit down and shut up." The host blinked. Maya continued. "Let me be clear. I didn't write lies. I wrote what happened. And if someone's reputation is cracked because of it, then maybe it wasn't built right in the first place. By the end of the segment, number Stand With Maya was trending nationwide. At school, her peers rallied. Students wore buttons that read, "Truth has no age limit." Kiara created a digital petition demanding that the Moreau family drop the lawsuit. Within days, it had over 150,000 signatures, but with support came new risks. One evening, as Maya and Grace returned from the corner bodega, they found a note taped to their apartment door. It read, "Stay in your place." Grace stared at it for a moment, then calmly pulled it down and tore it in half. "I'm calling the police," she said. "No," Maya said softly. "Call the press." Daniel helped them release a short video statement. In it, Maya stood against a bare wall, her voice steady. "I've been told to stay silent, to shrink, to stop. But the truth doesn't come with a mute button. I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." It went viral overnight, not because it was polished, but because it was real. A week later, Maya and Grace were invited to a private meeting at the offices of the Department of Justice. They entered a conference room lined with bookshelves and flags, where two federal investigators waited. One of them, a stern woman in her 60s, leaned forward. "We believe the lawsuit is a strategic effort to intimidate not just Maya, but others like her." Grace's voice was firm. "So what are you going to do about it?" "We're looking into expanding whistleblower protections for minors," the agent replied. "But we'd like Maya's help. Her experience could guide new legislation." "Huh." Maya sat back. "You want to use my case to write a law?" "We want your voice to help protect others who haven't spoken up yet." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." At home that night, Grace stared at Maya as she brushed her hair before bed. "You know, baby," she said, "when this all started, I just wanted to protect you." Maya smiled in the mirror. "You did. I didn't want the world to break you." Maya turned. "It didn't. It made me louder." Grace kissed her on the forehead. "Then we let them hear you." Weeks passed. The Moreau estate quietly withdrew the lawsuit. No apology, no public statement, just silence. But the damage they intended never landed. Because by then, Maya's story wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to the classrooms that read her words aloud, to the communities that started Still Here chapters, to the kids who now knew they didn't need permission to speak. Maya taped a fresh note to her bedroom wall, right next to Kiara's letter. It read, "If the echo of truth makes the powerful tremble, let it ring louder." And it did. Spring thawed Brooklyn slowly, melting gray snow into puddles that mirrored the sky. The sidewalks filled again with noise kids playing hopscotch, buses groaning along avenues, the familiar smell of roasted peanuts returning to corners. But inside Brookstone Academy, change was blooming too, not in the halls or bulletin boards, but in the minds of its students and staff. One morning, Principal Whitmore called Maya into her office. The space had softened since Maya's first visit, less stern, more lived in. A plant sat on the windowsill, and behind her desk, a framed quote read, "Leadership begins with listening." "Maya," she said, "we're redesigning the 9th grade civics curriculum, and I want you to help." Maya blinked. "I'm not even in 9th grade yet." "That's why I'm asking," Whitmore smiled. "Because the lessons that shaped you didn't come from textbooks. They came from life, and we need that in the classroom." Maya sat down, processing the weight of the invitation. "What would I do?" "You'd help outline a unit, something real, something they won't forget." Maya looked out the window. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd start with silence." Whitmore nodded. "Go on. Not the kind in libraries. The kind in classrooms when students want to say something but don't think anyone cares. That kind of silence teaches us something too. And I think it's time we unlearned it." Whitmore smiled. "Then that's your first lesson plan." Maya spent the next weeks working with a team of teachers and community leaders to develop a unit called Unwritten Voices. It wasn't just about civic structures. It was about systems, why they exist, who they serve, and who they fail. Each lesson began with a question. Who decides what stories get told? What happens when we don't speak up? What makes a voice powerful? Students responded with essays, poems, debates. One class painted a mural in the cafeteria that read, "We are not quiet by choice." Even teachers changed. One history teacher scrapped her traditional unit on the Constitution to instead examine how amendments were shaped by protest, petition, and persistence. She began by quoting Maya's speech at the youth forum. Maya, walking past that classroom one afternoon, paused as she heard her name. She didn't interrupt. She just smiled. Meanwhile, the Still Here anthology was adapted into a podcast. Maya co-hosted the first season with Daniel Kim. Each episode featured a student reading their story, followed by a short conversation. The third episode, "My Name Is Not a Punchline," was Kiara's. She read her piece slowly, her Brooklyn accent unfiltered, proud. "When I walk into a classroom and they can't pronounce my name, I don't laugh anymore. I correct them. Because my name is a poem my grandmother whispered the day I was born." The episode went viral. Listeners wrote in from Seattle, Atlanta, Toronto. One teacher emailed, "This story gave my students permission to correct me. And I'm grateful." Maya's world, once small, was now threaded across thousands of homes, phones, classrooms, but she never lost sight of the quiet spaces. One evening, while waiting for Grace outside her health sciences night class, Maya sat on a bench, hoodie up, notebook in her lap. A janitor passed by with a mop bucket, humming softly. She watched him move, remembering the blue bucket her mother once pushed. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, surprised. "Has anyone ever asked what your shift is like?" The man paused. Not really. Would you want to talk about it?" "I'm collecting voices, unheard ones." He studied her a moment, then nodded slowly. "I've got a story. A few, actually." Maya opened her notebook. "I'm listening." That summer, Maya was invited to Washington, D.C. Again, this time not to speak, but to consult. The Department of Education had begun developing a pilot program based on the Unwritten Voices curriculum. They wanted Maya's feedback. She sat at a long table, surrounded by adults with advanced degrees and government titles. "What's the most important part of this program?" one official asked. Maya didn't hesitate. "Trust. And how do we build that?" She met his gaze. "By letting students teach, too." Silence followed, then nods. Back in Brooklyn, Grace graduated from her night program with honors. Maya sat in the front row, clapping louder than anyone, tears streaking her cheeks. Afterward, at a small dinner with friends and neighbors, someone asked Grace what came next. She smiled. "I want to open a health literacy clinic. For folks like me who don't know how to read their own prescriptions or fill out insurance forms." Maya looked at her mother with awe. "You're going to change lives," she whispered. Grace winked. "Runs in the family." One night, as they cleaned up dishes, Grace turned to Maya. "You tired?" "A little. Think you've done enough?" Maya paused, then smiled. "Not even close." In her room, Maya added one more name to her wall of voices. Beneath it, she wrote, "The most important lessons aren't in the syllabus. They're in the silences we refuse to let stay quiet." And across the city, through headphones, through hallways, through hearts, those lessons were being heard. Summer's breath settled gently over Brooklyn, bringing with it the scent of barbecues, faint notes of jazz from cracked windows, and the hum of window fans churning against heat. Maya Williams, now 14, walked the familiar stretch of Jefferson Avenue with a different weight in her step, not heavy, but rooted. Purpose had become muscle memory. On this particular morning, she stood before a worn brick building in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the community center where she had first tutored Kiara. A blue tarp stretched across the front wall, scaffolding climbing like vines around it. Inside, the floors echoed as volunteers swept, painted, and replaced ceiling tiles. The center was being renovated, reimagined into something larger, and Maya was a part of that vision. "Welcome to the Williams Center for Story and Justice. Read the new banner." It wasn't Maya's idea. It was Grace's. "They need to know your name, baby," Grace had said, voice quiet but firm. "Not for the fame, but for the fight you didn't walk away from." Maya had rolled her eyes, but privately, the honor humbled her. Not because it was named after her, but because it meant something would stand even when she wasn't in the room. Inside, Kiara now helped run a summer program for younger kids, teaching them how to tell their stories through spoken word and theater. She greeted Maya with a playful grin. "You're late. I'm inspirational," Maya teased. "We arrive when the narrative demands it." "Oh," Kiara laughed. "Well, the narrative wants you to help paint." They joined a group of students in the main hall. The wall they were working on had been primed for a mural, a timeline of youth activism across history. It began with Ruby Bridges and wound its way through Malcolm X, the Greensboro Four, the Parkland survivors, and now, Maya and her peers. As they painted, a boy named Isaiah looked up. "Miss Maya, do you think people will remember us?" Maya thought a moment, brushing yellow into a sunburst behind a bookstack. "If we do this right," she said, "the wall won't let them forget." Elsewhere, Grace sat in a borrowed office space with 3 other women from the neighborhood. Their laptops hummed. Medical brochures were spread across the table. The Williams Health Literacy Project was becoming real. They had a space, volunteer nurses, and even a small grant. But more than that, they had each other. "I met a grandmother last week who had stopped taking her meds because the label confused her," Grace shared. "She thought every other day meant twice a day." One of the women shook her head. "That's not her fault. That's the system failing her." Grace nodded. "And we're going to teach people how to fight back with knowledge." They weren't waiting for policy change. They were building power block by block. That evening, Maya received a call from a filmmaker who had been following her journey for over a year. A documentary on youth-led reform was in the works, and they wanted Maya to be a consultant and appear on camera. "I'm not a celebrity," Maya warned. "That's why we want you," the filmmaker replied. "You're real." Maya hesitated. She didn't love the spotlight, but she remembered Isaiah's question. Would they remember? "Okay," she said, "but only if you show the messy parts too. The doubt, the fear, the days I almost gave up. Especially those," came the reply. Later that night, Maya sat on the fire escape with her notebook open. The stars above were faint, swallowed by city light. But still there, still patient. She wrote, "I used to think silence was the enemy. Now I know it's the space before the voice begins. What matters is whether we choose to fill it." A breeze stirred the pages. Below, the neighborhood breathed in rhythm, and Maya, even as the weight of her work pulled at her young shoulders, smiled. Because the next chapter wasn't hers alone. It belonged to Kiara, leading workshops with pride, to Grace, decoding prescriptions for women who finally understood what their bodies needed, to Isaiah, painting history with reverence, and to the thousands who had read, listened, spoken. Maya wasn't the voice anymore. She was the echo and the invitation. The Williams Center would open officially in 1 month. The mayor was expected to attend. So were reporters. But more importantly, so were kids from across the borough, kids who hadn't been heard yet. And Maya knew what she'd say when she stood at that podium, under a banner she hadn't asked for but now understood. She would say, "You don't have to be loud to matter. You just have to be true. And when you speak, we will listen." The fire escape creaked gently beneath her. Brooklyn exhaled, and the wall across town waited blank, sacred, unfinished. The morning of the grand opening dawned warm and golden, sunlight skipping across the rooftops of Brooklyn like a promise. Outside the newly named Williams Center for Story and Justice, a crowd had already gathered: students, parents, teachers, neighbors, journalists, even politicians. Some held signs that read, "Still here," and "Let the kids speak." Others simply stood quietly, hands in pockets, waiting. Inside, Maya adjusted her collared shirt in the restroom mirror, smoothing the sleeves of her navy blazer. She wasn't used to dressing up, but today wasn't about comfort. It was about respect for the journey, for the people who walked beside her, and for the ones still finding their voices. A knock on the door. "You ready?" Kiara peeked in, wearing a t-shirt she'd screen-printed herself. Unwritten, undeniable. Maya smiled. "Let's go light the match." They stepped onto the small outdoor stage set up in front of the center. A sea of faces looked up, some smiling, some solemn, all attentive. Maya spotted Grace in the front row, her arms folded, pride beaming from her eyes like a second sun. A local reporter introduced Maya with the reverence usually reserved for lifetime achievement honorees. And today, we gather not just to open a building, but to open a future because of a girl who refused to stay quiet. Nah. The applause was thunderous as Maya stepped up to the podium. She gripped the edges, took a breath, and began. When I was 11, someone threw a glass ashtray at my head because I defended my mother's dignity. I stood up, not because I thought I was brave, but because I couldn't stand by. That moment changed everything. It pushed me into the spotlight, into interviews, into policy rooms I never thought I'd see. But what I've learned since then is this. She paused, scanning the crowd. It was never really about me. The air stilled. It was about a girl named Kiara who didn't eat before class. A janitor whose shift ends before anyone says goodnight. A mother who read her daughter's prescription wrong because no one ever taught her how. A classroom where no one calls on the quiet kid. It's about all the names we don't put on plaques, all the stories we skip. All the truths we're afraid to say out loud. She placed her hand over her heart. This center isn't a monument to my voice. It's a microphone for yours. The applause came again, louder, richer. Some cheered, others wiped their eyes. But Maya wasn't done. She stepped back and gestured to the curtain behind her. Volunteers pulled it aside, revealing the mural the students had spent weeks painting. It depicted a timeline, yes, but not of dates. Of people. Expressions, movements, from civil rights marches to cafeteria protests, from courtrooms to classrooms. At the center of it all, a painted figure of a girl, brown-skinned, fists unclenched, eyes forward, stood holding an open notebook. The pages lifted into the air, transforming into birds mid-flight. Beneath it, the words, "When we speak, we do not just change the world, we remember we were always meant to." That evening, after the speeches, the food, the photos, the laughter, Maya sat alone in the quiet of the library. The lights had been dimmed. The hum of the vending machines was the only sound. She ran her fingers across the spines of donated books, paused at one with a cracked green cover. It was the same dictionary Grace had once used to study English phrases. The same one Maya had hidden under her bed after Moreau threw that ashtray. She opened it, and to her surprise, found a slip of paper tucked between the pages. It was Grace's handwriting. For every door they tried to close, you built a window. For every silence they offered, you answered with truth. I'm proud of you. Not because the world knows your name, but because you never forgot your own. Tears welled, warm and uninvited. Maya folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. The room felt different now, not empty, just waiting. She walked to the community corkboard near the exit, where students pinned thoughts and questions. One note caught her eye. How do I start? Maya grabbed a marker and wrote underneath. Speak. Someone is already listening. The documentary premiered 3 weeks later. It didn't have fancy narration or sweeping orchestras. It had hallway footage. Cafeteria noise. Kids tripping over words, then finding them again. Critics called it raw, honest, transformative, but Maya barely read the reviews. She was too busy helping Grace prep for the health clinic's soft launch. Too busy tutoring Kiara's younger cousin in algebra. Too busy reviewing stories for Still Here, Volume 2. Fame, she knew now, was not the goal. Legacy was, and legacy wasn't carved in marble. It was sown in classrooms, whispered on playgrounds, passed hand to hand in the form of courage. One night, long after the neighborhood had gone to sleep, Maya stood at the fire escape again. She looked out at Brooklyn, breathing steady beneath the stars. She pulled out her notebook, the same one she had started 3 years ago, and she wrote, I am not the flame. I am the match. The spark. The echo that reminds others their fire is already burning. She closed the notebook. Behind her, the city waited, and within it, thousands of stories still unwritten. She was ready, because now the world didn't just know her name. It had learned to listen. The story of Maya Williams reminds us that courage doesn't always roar sometimes. It speaks quietly but firmly, standing up when it would be easier to stay silent. It teaches us that justice often begins with one voice refusing to be ignored. And that true change doesn't require permission, it requires persistence. Maya's journey shows that the most powerful movements often come not from those in power, but from those who have been overlooked, underestimated, and unheard. It's a call to listen deeply, to act bravely, and to never assume someone is too young, too quiet, or too ordinary to shift the world. Because when one voice speaks truth, it echoes into thousands, and those echoes build a legacy.